Alright, so I summoned Triki, let's talk about Triki. Hey free to play gang, welcome back to another video. So for today's video, let's talk a little bit more about Triki. We are going to start off with his skills. So skill 1, Green Flames, attacks an enemy twice dealing damage equal to 30% and 80% of attacks separately. Each strike transfers a debuff from Loki to the target. If successfully transferred, then you have an additional 50% chance of inflicting stun for 1 turn. So this first skill is going to be excellent against enemies who primarily target him. So Espers with Inferno typing, so for example Renzi loves to target him, especially in PvP and in the Temporal Tower. You would then be able to return that defense break immediately and probably land a stun at the same time. So his first skill makes him excellent with the Avatar Relic set, which is obviously what I'm running him with. And let's take a look at his passive. This does not get upgrades, which means that he is very cheap to upgrade in terms of ability mons. So Gambit, Loki's attack will not miss. Any enemy who clears the teammate's debuffs will lose 30% of their current HP and all buffs, as well as become petrified for 1 turn. Now this passive is the sole reason why he's actually in like S rank in my tier list, right? But I'm struggling to put in double S. And the reason why I want to put in double S is because of his passive, because his one passive counters so many of the god tier Espers in the game. So his passive counters Sally, his passive also counters Clara. I'll show you who are those 2 Espers in just a moment. But he is so powerful in PvP, and this passive alone, he just needs to sit there and he will be so effective. But that's not all, right? He also has his third skill, which is an AoE strip. So the skill is Revolver, attacks all enemies 3 times, each dealing damage equal to 35% of attack, with a 65% chance, of course this goes up to 75%, of dispelling 1 buff from targets and inflicting miss rate up for 2 turns. The first strike extends all target debuffs by 1 turn. Now this skill is such a great counter offense against like enemy cleave comp. So for example, if you strip all of their buffs, like let's say they are running a Gabriel, you strip all of that, you will then land this miss rate up, and this is very powerful because this miss rate up could potentially stop some of their DPS Espers from dealing tremendous amount of damage that could potentially one-shot your entire team. So I'm talking about Espers such as Chloe or Lin Xiao. These are the 2 popular Espers that run around, and as long as you land a miss rate up on them, you probably already have the fight in the bag. And of course, I've tested this before, so the first strike that extends all debuffs by 1 turn, if your first strike lands the miss rate up at the same time, which means that they are possibly not immune, or maybe you strip the buff and you land a miss rate up on the first hit, that miss rate up is going to last for 3 turns. But of course, with his third skill, this gives us an excellent chance to use a very specific relic, which is what I really enjoy using him with, and that relic is none other than the Tyranny of Zeus. Now this is not a very common relic, I don't see a lot of people running this. So what it does is damage dealt has a 20% chance of inflicting stun for 1 turn. And I have noticed that on his multi-hits, he will have separate opportunities to land a stun, which means that his first skill, which hits twice, would have twice the number of chances to proc this stun. And his third skill, which hits 3 times, would have 3 chances to proc the stun. So you notice that running Triki with the Tyranny of Zeus, you tend to stun a lot of enemies pretty frequently. And of course, Tyranny of Zeus runs really well with the Avatar Relic set. So whenever you land a counter attack, if not for the fact that you have a stun here, whenever you land a counter attack, you would then have a 20% chance to stun because of the Tyranny of Zeus. And of course, the stats that we want to be focusing on is going to be HP, because look at his base HP, it's tremendously high. So you want to focus more on his HP, push him to like, he can easily hit 50k HP, right? And of course you want him to be really fast as well, because you want him to be able to land that first turn miss rate up, or maybe you can even potentially land a stun on his third skill, and then after that is really easy. And of course you might want to have a little bit more accuracy than me. You might probably want to have 80%, so some people say that 80% is like the soft cap, or rather the hard cap, whatever that it's called. Basically you don't really need more than 80%. I have not actually confirmed this myself, and I'm still very confused on why this is the case, but let's assume that 80% is a good number to get. Let's try to aim for 80% accuracy. So in terms of where Triki is used, or rather where I tend to use him a lot, so I use him a lot in PvP, like every single one of my PvP, because he's such a great counter against most of the endgame meta comps. And I do use him sometimes, very infrequently, but sometimes I do use him in the Temporal Tower, especially against stages that have a lot of cleansers. So stages that have like multiple Claras, multiple Hengrias, yes, those Espers. Then I will use him because his third skill over here would instantly reduce the enemy's HP by 30% if they cleanse their teammates. So like I promised, let's take a look at the 2 Espers, or actually there are quite a few of them, but the main 2 Espers that come to mind is Sally and Clara, and of course you can also counter Hengria this way. So let's see how his passive counters them, right? So let's take a look at the Atlas over here. So this is Sally. Let's take a look at the third skill, right? Ode to Joy. Enters a Sweet Harbor state for 2 turns, rendering Sif immobile. Dispels a debuff from and heals every ally every blah 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 every time they take their turn. So basically whenever one of their allies take a turn, she will lose 30% of her HP instantly. And this is such a strong counter, so she also gets petrified at the same time because of Loki's passive. And of course, Clara, she has a ton of cleansing over here because of her passive. So these are the two Espers that are strongly countered by Loki. I'm going to show you guys one PvP round. I'm not going to show you too many because it's kind of like the same thing. So as you can see over here, I'm using him against an enemy PvP team with Clara and Hingyue. So clearly I'm going to be able to counter these two Espers a lot. And you see Triki in action over here. So the first thing you need to do is use your Revolver, your S3, and try to remove as many buffs as you can. Of course, that's not always going to be the case, but as you can see, we managed to stun Dona, which is excellent because right now, if he's stunned, he's not going to be able to get his passive up. But their Clara over here managed to cleanse the debuff, which is usually not a good thing for me. However, we do have Triki, and therefore Clara remains paralyzed. And as you can see, because Clara lost that 30% HP from her cleanse, the enemy's Hingyue actually healed Clara with her passive, and therefore the Hingyue also became paralyzed herself. And of course, the same is true if the enemy runs with a Sally. Their Sally would then be constantly paralyzed whenever one of her allies take their turn, and it's very easy for her to take out a Sally from the start as long as a couple of her allies take their turn. And over here, the reason why I have been lowering Hingyue's HP is so that her passive would then petrify herself. So this is a really good way for you to cycle petrifications, because the way the AI works for Clara and Hingyue is they tend to target the lowest HP ally, so you can use that to advantage to petrify specific targets that you don't want them to move. So typically I tend to lower the HP of their healers, and I slowly work towards defeating their supports while fighting most tanky comps. And over here, if not for the fact that I have Tyranny of Zeus, I would not have been able to land a stun with my Triki's first skill. So the Tyranny of Zeus is very powerful for Triki. However, you should take note that one of Triki's weaknesses is going to be immunity. So as long as you do not remove the immunity with his third skill, or you do not have a backup immunity remover, then his passive will not actually petrify the targets whenever they do a cleanse. However, it's not a full counter against Triki because they will still continue to lose at 30% HP. So due to the current meta, there is no way that I will replace Triki at all. He's going to be a permanent stay in my team. And if you do use him and you find that you're encountering a lot of tanky comps that contain Clara, that contain Hingyue, and they also contain Sally, then it is probably time for you to use a Triki as well. But I think that's it for this video. I think Triki is an amazing Esper, and I think a lot of people do not actually know how to use their Triki. I see some people running him DPS, and I see some people running him in the Ritual Miracles as well. This is not how you make Triki shine. So he needs a lot of HP to remain on the field for a long time, and he needs a lot of speed to go first, and he also needs a lot of accuracy to land his debuffs. However, as far as I'm aware, I do not think that the Tyranny of Zeus actually requires accuracy. It's just a percentage proc, so it cannot actually be resisted, but this is just what I think. Anyway, I think this is a good time to end the video, so if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more Dislyte content. And this has been free to play, by the way, and as always, I will see you in the next video.